It's hard to think of a presidency that stirred things up quite like Donald Trump's. I mean, it was dramatic, it was controversial, it changed a lot. But we're not here to just rehash the past. What we're going to do is look forward. What's the real lasting impact? When all the dust finally settles, what's the verdict going to be?
And really, that question is at the absolute heart of it all, isn't it? It's all about balance, right? About consequences. We're talking about a legacy that, honestly, is still being written. So let's dive in and break down the key areas that are going to help us start figuring this out.
Okay, so let's talk about this idea we're framing this around, a 2026 reckoning. You might be asking, why 2026? What's so special about that year? Well, think about it. Big policies, whether they're about the economy or how we deal with other countries, they need time to play out. They need time to show their true colors. By 2026, a lot of the short-term noise and the daily headlines will have faded away, and that should give us a much, much clearer picture of the actual long-term impact. All right, first up, let's tackle the big one. I mean, probably one of the most debated topics of all, the economy. The promise, you'll remember, was all about unleashing American prosperity. But what actually happened? Well, it's really a tale of two very, very different stories. So, on one hand, you've got what supporters call the boom. They'll point right to the huge tax cuts in 2017 and all the deregulation, saying that's what fueled strong growth and brought unemployment to record lows, especially for minority groups. And the logic was pretty straightforward, right? Fewer taxes, fewer rules, that should free up businesses to invest more and hire more people. But then you have the other side of the coin, the bill. And here, critics will tell you that those very same policies made the national debt absolutely skyrocket. They'll also argue that the trade wars, which were supposed to protect American jobs, actually ended up scrambling global supply chains. And, they say, the lion's share of the benefits ended up going to the wealthiest. And when you look at the numbers, you can really see that tension in black and white. Yeah, GDP growth did fluctuate for sure. But look at the national debt. That's a steep, undeniable climb. And these two things, right here, are the absolute core of the economic debate. It all boils down to one question. Was the growth we saw worth the mountain of debt that came with it? And you have to remember, for millions of Americans, this quote really captures how they felt. It wasn't about some abstract number on a government debt clock in Washington, D.C. For them, it was about something much more real. Getting a job, seeing opportunities open up, and feeling a renewed sense of economic hope for their families.
Now, this massive debate over the economy, well, it wasn't just happening at home. It was mirrored by an equally dramatic shift in how America was dealing with the rest of the world. America first, I mean, that wasn't just a catchy slogan, was it? It turned out to be a fundamental top-to-bottom change in global strategy.
And man, things started changing fast. Right out of the gate in 2017, the U.S. pulled out of that huge Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal. Then you had these bold and, let's be honest, very controversial moves, like moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. This whole approach, it led to some really high-stakes confrontations, like what we saw with Iran. But it also led to some pretty historic diplomatic breakthroughs, like the Abraham Accords. It was just a period of constant and very deliberate disruption on the world stage.
And it's so important to understand that this wasn't all just random chaos. There was a clear playbook here, a real doctrine. The whole focus shifted away from those big, messy, multi-country treaties toward one-on-one deals. Old-school alliances like NATO, they were openly challenged. And economic weapons like tariffs were used aggressively as a main tool of foreign policy. We also saw the U.S. pull out of major international agreements like the Paris Climate Accord and the Iran nuclear deal.
And this idea, this global recalibration, it's a huge part of the legacy we're talking about. So what did it all mean in the end? Did it lead to a weaker, more isolated America? Or was it a much-needed correction, one that finally forced our allies to step up and pay their fair share and made our adversaries think twice? That right there is the core of the debate.
Okay, so we've talked economy, we've talked foreign policy, but beyond all the policies and international deals, maybe the most profound impact of all was on the social and cultural fabric of the country itself. And this is where the story gets really, really personal for a lot of people.
I mean, just look at this. This visualizes a trend that absolutely accelerated during those years. You're looking at a nation where that little bit of common ground people used to share was just shrinking and shrinking. And the gap between the two political sides wasn't just a gap anymore. It was widening into a massive chasm. And it's so important to get this. This wasn't just about people yelling on cable news or how districts voted. No, this division filtered right down into everyday life. It reshaped Thanksgiving dinners, it broke up friendships, it changed the entire dynamic in neighborhoods across the country. The political became deeply personal. And these two voices, they just perfectly capture the raw, emotional core of that divide. On one side, you have people who felt he gave a voice to those who had been ignored for decades. They felt seen. They felt like someone was finally on their side. But for others, that exact same rhetoric felt incredibly damaging. It felt like the country was literally being pulled apart at the seams, threatening the very idea of what it means to be American. All right, so all of this brings us right back to where we started, our 2026 reckoning. We've looked at the economy, we've looked at foreign policy, and we've talked about the nation's social fabric. But the final verdict? It's not in yet, not by a long shot, because there are several huge factors that are still playing out right now. So as we look ahead to 2026, these are the big things to keep your eyes on. First, what's the long-term impact of all those judicial appointments going to be? We're talking about judges who could be shaping American law for a generation. How have the Republican and Democratic parties fundamentally changed? Are those changes permanent? And maybe the biggest question of all, how resilient are America's democratic institutions? Will they hold up? And then there's the economy's path and where our culture goes from here. The answers to these questions are what will write the final chapter. So, with 2026 getting closer and closer, what will that final verdict be? You know, history's judgment is almost never simple. It's never just good or bad. It's always this incredibly complex balance sheet of gains and losses, of things that were planned and a whole lot of things that weren't. As we barrel towards 2026, the one thing that's for sure is that the debate over this legacy is far from over.